Hi, I'm Corey Grant.
And I'm Nick Courtney. Today we will talk to you about lake trout populations in the Great Lakes and the factors which led to the decline in their numbers, as well as restocking programs being used for their recovery. The vast diversity of lake trout is thought to be contributed to the expansion and retreating of glaciers formed during the last ice age. This caused the lake trout to be pushed from lakes into rivers and back again, forcing them to adapt to many different spawning habitats. The lake trout typically spawn in early fall in rocky, nearshore areas that have been cleared away by wind, wave, and current influences. Some species will also spawn in deeply submerged reefs or even migrate up rivers and streams for reproduction. Young lake trout initially feed on zooplankton and eventually shrimp-like crustaceans, but as they mature, lake trout will feed on whatever food source is available, from zooplankton, insects, and even smaller lake trout.
Historically, dozens of physically and genetically distinct varieties of lake trout existed. Most of these varieties are now unfortunately extinct. This presentation will cover the three most dominant species present in the Great Lakes: the lean, humper, and siskoet. Lean trout, or mackinaws as they are sometimes called, spawned in shallow water and have less fat than other forms. They tend to spawn in the clear nearshore areas that are shallower than 80 meters. The lean is the most vulnerable to overfishing and parasites such as sea lamprey due to its longevity and reduced juvenile investment.
In contrast to the lean, siskoets, also known as fats, were the fattest and most oily of all forms and were caught in deep offshore waters, usually greater than 100 meters. Because of the depth of their habitat, little information on their spawning grounds and seasonal movements is known. More research on this species is needed to better understand how they are being affected. Humpers, or paper bellies, are found only in Lake Superior and resemble the siskoet in appearance, but have thin ventral body walls and a small size at maturity. The humpers are the least abundant of the three forms and are primarily found on deep offshore reefs and steep banks leading into deeper, cold water.
Although all three forms are of the same species, as you can see here, they vary greatly in physical appearance and to some degree genetic makeup. The life cycles of all forms of lake trout are relatively similar from alevins to mature adults and only different on locations for spawning. Commercial fishing in the Great Lakes began in the 1800s for both the United States and Canada. The catch rates in Lake Ontario were as high as 457,000 kilograms in 1879 in Canada and higher yet in the United States. But after this period, a sharp reduction by more than 10%. By the mid-1950s, the native population was at its lowest and showed catch rates less than 500 kilograms.
Total catch rates for lake trout in all lakes peaked in 1903 at 3.3 million kilograms, but dropped drastically in 1913 to 1950 to 2 million kilograms per year. The consistent overfishing during this period was thought at the time to be sustainable, but is now known to be the leading cause in the population's decline. Vast improvements in fishing technology coupled with more fishermen resulted in a steady harvest over several decades. Despite this increase, nobody clued in that had the population been stable, the catch should actually have been increasing. In reality, the population was steadily declining towards collapse. In 1949 to 1952, the commercial fishing intensity doubled, which sustained yield in spite of a 50% decline in abundance. Trout stocks in Michigan waters of Lake Superior in 1949 were fast nearing a dangerously low level and in poor condition to withstand the impeding ravages of a growing population of sea lamprey.
The lake trout remained the top carnivore in its food chain until the 1950s, when the invasive sea lamprey were introduced to the Great Lakes. The sea lamprey gained entry into the Great Lakes from the Atlantic Ocean through man-made locks and ship canals that were introduced in the late 1830s. After entering the Great Lakes, the sea lamprey became the main predatory species for the lake trout. It is estimated that between 40 to 60% of host fish die as a result of their wounds. Until the 1970s, when control methods were in effect to limit the amount of lamprey, the lake trout populations took a hit of over 70% of their remaining stocks, reducing their numbers to the brink of extinction. They were actually extirpated from Lake Ontario and Lake Erie.
The restoration plan focused on well-researched nearshore fisheries where the outcome could be more accurately predicted. The lean trout have a much higher death rate from lamprey attacks as compared to the Siskiwit, and for that reason, lean trout have been the primary focus on rehabilitation. Due to funding and typical bureaucratic processes, stocking in Canada never reached the capacity recommended by researchers, and is probably one of the reasons Lake Ontario did not recover nearly as quickly as the other Great Lakes. The United States stocked between 60 and 90% of the recommended levels, while Ontario only met 52% of this commitment. Between the three states listed here, the United States stocked approximately 1.5 million to Canada's 1 million on a yearly basis.
Yearlings were released at a rate to replace the lack of natural breeding in the wild. However, not as many were released as recommended. Subsequent research, however, showed that despite the high numbers of fish released, very few were surviving in the wild, prompting the cut of funding to the program. Luckily, due to the control of lamprey population and strict quotas on fishing, the natural population, especially in Lake Superior, began to recover strongly. Historically, there are dozens of varieties of lake trout. Because of intensive overfishing and the introduction of invasive sea lamprey, lake trout populations have been dramatically reduced. Restocking programs and invasive species control methods have led to a noticeable increase in population sizes throughout the Great Lakes, but more effort is required in order to guarantee the survival of the lake trout.
Levels in the upper Great Lakes, especially Lake Superior, are said to be approaching pre-collapse levels and are now considered to be healthy. Lake Erie is well on the way to recovery, while Lake Ontario, though showing signs of improvement, is lacking in progress. Some researchers think that explosion of other predators such as rainbow, steelhead, and salmon in Lake Ontario have made for greater competition, something that the lake trout historically has not had to contend with.
Regardless of progress, many knowledge gaps exist pertaining to lake trout spawning, especially Siskiwit. More research is needed to ensure proper management of this fishery in the future. And besides, they taste great.
That concludes our presentation. Thank you for your time.
Cheers! Happy fishing!